feeling, of deja vu, standing, I don't know, memories, countless memories of standing and talking to all of y'all. I think many of y'all would also have that, and I hope they are pleasant memories. I know when I was teaching, many of y'all used to grumble, especially in the statistics classes, when I used to make y'all calculate without calculators. Anyone remembers? And at that time, when y'all grumbled, I told y'all will thank me later. I said, go back to your basic principles. I hope that still lasts. Okay? It is with great pleasure that I am here today, that I'm chairing a session that talks about the future of psychology. Dr. Indira was my teacher as well. So, as I was telling someone, I have played all the roles in this department, from a student, and actually joined in 76, finished in 78, came back as a UGC JRF, then as a lecturer, senior lecturer, reader, professor, chairperson. So all those roles have been played, so I know what most of you are feeling now. If Dr. Indira said she was the senior most, I think I'm the second senior most. And therefore, the alumni is, giving us this opportunity, otherwise who will listen to us? Okay? So this session is extremely important, especially for our young students, who I'm quite envious about because the whole world is in front of them. The second reason for me to be proud is that all the panelists are our alumni. To see our students doing so well outside, there can be no greater joy for a teacher. And therefore, I'm extremely...
I've been here.
Okay. This is usual. Okay? There'll be always something happening. Okay, yeah, check, please. Okay? So the session for today, or the discussion for today, is psychology and well-being in the future, breakthroughs, challenges, and opportunities. Psychology, which is common to all of us, is in our heart. As a discipline, has witnessed remarkable growth in India and elsewhere, shaping mental health, and Dr. Indira did talk about this, and not only mental health, education with our digital world, workplace dynamics, work from home, etc., and even policy making and advocacy is what she was talking about. However, as we step into the future, we need to be aware. We can't be wearing rose-tinted glasses all the time. So if we are aware of our breakthroughs, our challenges, and our opportunities, I'm sure we, as a team, can contribute a lot. So today we will explore breakthroughs, advances in neuroscience, mental health, positive psychology, and India's potential role in the global world, challenges, the stigma around mental health, accessibility to psychological services, professionalizing our work, and the need for culturally relevant research. Dr. IJP, in her keynote address, did speak about the need for advocacy and professionalization. If we have to grow as a discipline, we have to be process-oriented, not just result-oriented. The way we do it is as important as what we achieve. And the last is, of course, opportunities. There are opportunities galore for all of you. The rise of digital therapy, the AI-driven mental health initiatives, the growing acceptance of psychological interventions in mainstream healthcare, which Dr. Vidya will be talking about, are some of the opportunities coming our way. The present generation of psychologists are indeed fortunate to be living in this world. So with a distinguished list of panel members from clinical psychology, research, technology, and education, we hope to throw some light on the evolving landscape. Let me invite our panel members, Dr. Vidya Satyanarayan, please do come. Dr. Suman, Dr. Gideon, Please take a seat. Dr. Jyotsna. Our fifth speaker, our panelist, is Dr. Nandini Nayak, who we would like, since we are talking about technology, will be joining us online. Right now, she's in California. She will be talking about technology and psychology, and it's an unearthly hour for her. It is 1:32 in the night, but she said she'll stay up tonight just to be with all of us. So thank you. Okay, that is Nandini. Okay, while I know that the topic is huge, and I'm doing disservice and injustice to both the topic and the speakers, each speaker will get only 10 to 12 minutes. Okay? Anyone who knows me knows I'm a hard-time taskmaster. So at 10 minutes, maybe I'll ring a bell. At 12 minutes, they will stop. And if all of you all have heard of the Zeigarnik effect, the fact that they have spoken just a little to arouse your curiosity will make you think more about it. If there's closure, then you forget all about it. Right? Yes. So, let me start with Dr. Vidya. As Vidya was telling me just now, in all our vivas, with her name starting with the V, she was always the last. Okay? So we have turned the wheel today and we are making her the first. Okay? So Dr. Vidya is a consultant clinical psychologist and professor of clinical psychology. She completed her MPhil and PhD in clinical psychology from NIMHANS after doing her post-graduation in this department. Not this building, because she was in Manasa Bhavan then. No, we were there. She has worked in the government and private setting. Dr. Vidya served as Professor of Clinical Psychology in the Department of Psychiatry, St. John's Medical College, Hospital, Bangalore, for close to 20 years. She continues to be an adjunct faculty as Professor, Department of Medical Ethics, with the institution currently. She is a clinician, teacher, and researcher for 25 plus years. And she has 25 plus years of experience and has worked with a variety of clients across the age span, couples, families, medical and surgical conditions, people with disability, and the LGBTQ population. While at St. John's, she has liaised with multiple medical and surgical departments to provide inpatient and outpatient clinical care for their patients. She has coordinated training in mental health care for undergraduates and postgraduates in medicine, psychology, psychiatry, community health, nursing, and paraclinical subjects. She will bring all that expertise to her talk. So she will take psychology out of the role of psychology and see our acceptance across the world. Dr. Vidya, can I please invite you? There will be a question and answer session after all the panelists have finished. Please make it lively. No question is bad. So any question that you would like answered, because you have a rich, the experience they bring to the table is immense. Please do make use of it. So thank you. Yes, Vidya, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the department here at Jnana Bharati and to the Alumni Association for this wonderful opportunity to talk to all of you. They're just loading the presentation. The brief I've been given is to talk about psychology and how it relates beyond the therapy setting, beyond the clinic setting, traditionally as we learn about clinical psychology. So my working definition of the community is the medical surgical setting, the consultation liaison setting. I'm also going to tell you a little bit about our work in schools with different NGOs and different populations. It'll briefly touch the judiciary, and as part of that, also some of the work both in the hospital setting and otherwise that I've done with the LGBTQ community. Next slide, please. We've been thrust into the spotlight like never before, especially with the pandemic that all of us have managed to see through. And our influence has grown beyond the therapist's room. There is a heightened level of demand. Stigma is much lower than ever before. The challenges that all of us and our clients experience in life is also getting more and more complex with each passing year and situation. Our role is far more visible than it has been before. And we're all aware of the areas that we've studied with. So industrial, child, counseling, organizational behavior are the traditional definitions. But these have gone into far more areas that we are all aware of in the last few years. But there are opportunities today that go beyond that of the clinic or an academic setting like the university today. So whether we are data scientists, program officers, policy makers, policy experts, there are quite a few other roles that are due to us. Next slide, please. So in the medical surgical settings, like Man said, I trained here. I then trained at NIMHANS, worked there briefly for a few years before I moved to St. John's Medical College Hospital. And my training actually did not give me very much specific knowledge about working in a medical surgical area. But to my surprise and immense relief, the solid foundation that was laid in the master's course here, and then the intensive on-the-job training that I received in the MPhil course at NIMHANS, and then through the PhD, helped me navigate very many new areas that I may not have had traditional teaching in. So that framework allowed me to function. And this is an area which is a cutting edge area. People have worked in medical colleges or have taken care. We're all familiar with health psychology and behavioral medicine as areas. We study them as theory papers. But what I would like this audience to know and also think about as an opportunity is it's not just medical college hospitals or the departments of psychiatry with traditional patients with mental disorders or psychiatric diagnosis alone that there is work for us to do. All departments, whether it's oncology, endocrinology, obstetrics, gynae, community health, every department today is aware of the role of emotional factors in both causative, maintaining, and in interventional importance of psychological principles. And therefore, it's a huge area for us to consider. Training and research of undergraduates and postgraduates is also an area where we bring immense value because of the fact that good doctors or good medical and allied professionals need a lot of skills that are at the core of our competencies for them to be able to function effectively. Because ultimately the patients that they are treating are human beings and they're not just treating parts of the body. Those parts of the body in the person are also having many other psychosocial factors that are impacting both the health and the well-being of the individual. Next slide, please. The burden of non-communicable diseases in our country is growing, and a lot of data is suggesting, for example, that we are a ticking time bomb when it comes to the morbidity and mortality associated with, say, diabetes. Okay, and in the next 15, 20 years, India is going to see the effect of the growing metabolic disorders. So the integration of behavioral and communication science into public health programming is another very vital area where all of us as psychologists can contribute because we come with the competencies for this. Another thing that I'd like to reiterate here is there is tremendous recognition both in the public and the private healthcare setting. So a lot of corporate hospitals are now looking to add on psychologists on their team. Next slide, please. This is another group, like I said, that I wanted to talk to all of you about. In the last 10, 12 years, a lot of clients are coming into the hospital setting seeking help to deal with concerns either of orientation or wanting to transition with gender dysphoria, wanting to understand what they can do. So a lot of my work as a clinical psychologist, and that is the selection bias with which I'm speaking, because that has been my training and area of functioning, a lot of research in our setting has talked about the challenges of perception, the challenges of equality, and the dearth of professionals who can work with this population that comes in seeking help. So very often at St. John's, I would work, they would directly come in looking for a psychologist, and I would refer them on if we are, especially when we are looking at gender dysphoria and transitioning. I worked with endocrinologists, urologists, dermatologists, speech therapy professionals to help with transitioning. And also working with the individual themselves, families, NGOs for support and more specific information. I worked with the legal fraternity quite a bit. Karnataka has a very dynamic legal system which has done a lot of work for transgender individuals, and also have published specific information on how we can evaluate and how we can work. And this is an area where today in the corporate sector, a lot of companies are providing medical insurance and support. So you're likely to have clients coming in for help. Schools has traditionally been an area where psychologists have functioned, and we are all aware of that. But a lot of research earlier, and I think also Dr. Gideon's research in 2007, indicated that for a long time, there has been tokenism, or the expectation that existing professionals, teachers, will somehow take care also of some of these aspects. Another thing that has often happened is that counseling and working with emotional challenges has been understood more in the context of learning and academic challenges than looking at it in a more broad-based manner. So a lot of the demand, and today all boards, not just CBSE, all boards are mandating that every school needs to have a psychologist, and CBSE actually has a very good curriculum, and they brought out a manual of what they expect the school psychologist and counselor to do with the students in the school. So we are all also aware, both in terms of our personal lives and our professional lives, how much the digital world has taken over our lives, and Dr. Nandini is going to talk to us more about that aspect. But with students and with the younger population, this is an area that all of us have a lot that we can offer. And there are many manualized interventions that have been tried in our setting, and this is an area which has required and will continue to require our attention. A variety of different NGOs, I've kind of looked at bringing in some of my personal professional experience to showcase all the different spheres in which we can function, and also to refer to some of the areas we need to address. So whether it is mental health, sexuality, domestic violence, suicide helplines, rehabilitation of psychiatric patients, neurodevelopmental disabilities, our role as psychologists and clinical psychologists will involve partnerships, because as much as professionals we bring a lot to the table, we can't do everything. We need to partner with whoever is working in whichever area, so that the person that needs our help benefits maximum. And for that, this has been an invaluable learning for me to see how advocacy, Indra ma'am referred to that very, very eloquently in her plenary, in her talk, and to train people, even lay counselors. We want maximum reach to ensure that mental health needs are met, that vulnerable populations can be addressed. So training and capacity building is a large part of our responsibility as psychologists, and very often policy making and an advisory role, so that different perspectives that we are able to bring from a scientific mind to the table can be kept in perspective. Thank you. Some of the challenges that I foresee in working in these 3 or 4 areas is largely training. I think ma'am referred to that briefly. Different degrees have a focus on different competencies. The new NEP is bringing about a lot of challenges. I think many of you are the sandwiched generation and are needing to make choices for the future. So we need to look at both the breadth and the depth, whether it's general training or more technical, specific training in the coursework. And most importantly, when we come out into the real world and start working, sometimes we do find there's a misalignment between the job that we can possibly do and the training that we have got. So as a group, as a professional group, we need to pay attention to this. And there are many wide and open horizons for us in this. In the next 10, 15 years, we need to make the most of it. So we need to consider that when we are looking at curricula. Ma'am also in the morning, earlier in the afternoon, talked very specifically about Indian cultural perspectives and how important that is in training. So I'm not going to go over that again. Another area I think is licensing and regulation. Can we go on to the next, please? Data is indicating, this is a little older, but growth in clinical psychology, industrial and school. Next one, please. And this is a projection over till financial year 29. The areas identified for maximum growth are hospitals dealing with chronic diseases, and this is for psychologists, educational institutions, corporates, and also looking at fertility and elderly. Next. We have niche skills. We need to make the most of it. Like I said, the demand is more. We need to be able to also, I think, in training, be taught how to monetize and run businesses. Next one, please. My learnings, like I said when I started, the basic training, the competencies are fantastic and we can build on it. We need to be curious and willing to learn and think out of the box. We need to stay up to date, and interdependence and liaising with others becomes really important. Many trajectories are possible and the sky is the limit. Thank you all. Thank you, ma'am.
I'm sorry, Vidya, I pushed you, but what Vidya told us was that clinical psychologists can work outside mental illness. The world is your oyster. You can, wherever there are human beings, you will find some place for you. So you have to search for where you would like to work. Let me now call upon the second speaker. We are still with mental health and well-being, Dr. Ellen Suman. She is a professor, Department of Clinical Psychology in NIMHANS, Bangalore, and was the former head of the department. She obtained a postgraduate degree again from our department in 1984, and subsequently obtained her MPhil in medical and social psychology and PhD in clinical psychology from NIMHANS. She has been working as a consultant in the Department of Clinical Psychology for more than 3 decades at NIMHANS. She is currently a consultant for an adult psychiatry unit and the Trauma Recovery Clinic at NIMHANS Center for Wellbeing. The Trauma Recovery Clinic was started by her in 2013, and it is the first such clinic in India. She is also a consultant for the Center of Addiction Medicine at NIMHANS from 2005 to 2015. In 2005, she was tasked by the department to start a 1-month posting in de-addiction services for MPhil trainees. Her areas of research are psychotherapy, psychological trauma, and psychoactive substance. And today's talk will be on psychological trauma and well-being. She was the president of the Karnataka Association of Clinical Psychologists from 2009 to 2011. Currently, she is president of the Society for Addiction Psychology, for which she is also a founder member. I welcome you, Suman. Please take over.
So, at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be part of the panel discussion, or rather talk as a panelist. So like Dr. Sudha has already mentioned, the topic that I have chosen is psychological trauma and mental health. And this is a topic that I've been interested in for a very long time. So you may wonder what is new about psychological trauma. So essentially, psychological trauma occurs when an individual experiences an incident or a series of incidents or a life circumstance which is experienced as threatening, life-threatening in some way, and adversely affects the individual's functioning as well as well-being. Now, if you look at the definition very closely, you will find that it is fairly old. Most psychologists have talked about adverse experiences in childhood. Freud talked about it, neo-Freudians talked about it, and so on. So when you go back and look at psychology textbooks, you find that all this is old wine. You know, what is so new about talking about psychological trauma? However, if you look at what is happening, it is only at the end of the 20th century that research has been very systematic as far as psychological trauma is concerned. And especially with the ACE study, as it is called, which was published in 1998, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which was conducted in the United States, it was found that adverse childhood experiences also have a significant impact on later adult well-being as well as functioning. Now, interestingly, this particular study did not come from mental health professionals, but came from physicians and medical specialists and so on, and they were concerned about the high rate of mortality in the patients that they were seeing in the hospitals. So they found that it is very crucial for you to not only understand what is psychological trauma in the very early ages, in the developmental stage itself, but also address it fairly early. So early intervention is key in order to make sure that recovery from psychological trauma is very, very good, so that the long-lasting effects of psychological trauma is minimized. Now, if you look at psychological trauma, it is ubiquitous. It is worldwide, it is universal, and on top of it, it is from what you can say cradle to the grave, you know, that it is across the lifespan that you will experience psychological trauma. The complexity of psychological trauma is that it can be direct or it can be indirect, okay? It can be single or it can be multiple. It can also be what is called chronic. When you're in a particular circumstance or a situation from which you feel trapped and you're unable to move out, it can become a chronic trauma. So these are some of the complexities that clinicians and mental health professionals, psychologists, counselors have to understand when you have a client and you're struggling to understand what is it that is keeping recovery so slow and why they aren't improving as quickly as you thought. So that is one complexity that you can have. The other complexity is what is called complex trauma itself. That is, from the developmental years, you've been depending on caregivers to take adequate care of you, but there are certain instances or experiences of abuse and neglect that leads to entrapment within that particular situation, and you're unable to, because you're dependent on the caregivers for survival, and you're unable to come out of the situation, it leads to what is known as complex trauma. In addition, there are individuals who experience cumulative trauma. That is, more than one incident of psychological trauma across the lifespan. So research has shown that the more the number of cumulative trauma experiences that an individual has, the more adverse the psychological outcome is going to be, and more poor the functioning of the individual. So complex trauma and cumulative trauma are very important. Now, the other classification very often that has been used to divide psychological trauma that is experienced by individuals is what is known as the hand of God versus the hand of man. That is, trauma experiences which are man-made is different from trauma experiences which are natural. That is what is attributed to the higher element or God or higher powers. For example, you can have natural disasters, you can have floods, and so on. You cannot blame any single individual for the fate that you are experiencing. Research has shown that there is a significant difference in outcome of psychological trauma experiences when it is a natural event compared to an interpersonal trauma. When it comes to natural disasters or such as floods or earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, the outcome is much better. It does not lead to significant PTSD symptoms also. However, when it comes to interpersonal traumas such as bullying, being traumatized by others, it is as if you're chosen to suffer. So when it comes to interpersonal trauma, there is this concept called victimization. So there is very often a perpetrator and there is a victim. So there is a dyad involved here. So there is a general belief that somehow you're being targeted to suffer. So there is this concept of suffering. So if there is suffering, there has to be healing subsequently. So when there is a perpetrator involved and when there is a victim involved, you kind of go into the domain of what is evil and what is not evil. Like Dr. Sudha and earlier Dr. Indra Jaiprakash were saying, you're entering a great world of opportunity. But this great world of opportunity is clearly not easy because you're seeing more and more trauma of multiple kinds all over the world. And the complexity of trauma is going to be challenging for all psychologists. So when it comes to victimization, you will find that the degree of traumatization differs from individual to individual. So it is not the same. The same kind of trauma may lead to different kinds of reactions in different people, even if the age and gender of the victim is similar. So obviously, as psychologists, we know that there are protective factors. So the degree of traumatization may differ from individual to individual, out of which resilience definitely is one of the protective factors when we are talking about psychological trauma. There are other multiple factors which are involved in resilience and recovery, such as the gender of the victim, the age of the victim, the relationship of the perpetrator to the victim, the severity of the trauma event itself, the degree of controllability over the event, and also the time when possibly the victim was able to disclose about the trauma to somebody, which is very rare sometimes, as well as the kind of support that was received for the disclosure. So all this makes a very significant difference to recovery. Now, the problem with disclosure is the nature of the trauma event itself. There are some events which are related to shame and stigma. They are stigmatized. And a lot of shame is attached to certain kinds of traumatic events. So in those kind of events, disclosure may be problematic, so help may not be obtained very quickly. The individual may suffer in silence, and then recovery may be compromised. So this is something to remember about, and it becomes very essential for psychologists to be aware of underlying problems that the individual may have. There are certain myths about psychological trauma that also needs to be cleared. For example, that women suffer more, which is not true. Men suffer very often silently, but that is something that all psychologists who are in the helping profession should remember, that men also experience significant psychological trauma. The kind of psychological trauma that men may experience may vary in terms of nature and quality, but it is important to remember that the consequences of psychological trauma may vary across genders. So among women, you may find that there are more dissociative disorders or depression and so on, whereas among men, you may find that there is more substance use disorders, or when they are adolescents, there may be conduct problems and so on. So you cannot just brush it aside or minimize when you find that a male client of yours has experienced trauma and wishes to talk about it. It's very important not to minimize what is being disclosed to you or what is being revealed, because we have found that they need time. Because for men, it is very difficult to come to terms with expressing emotions, with seeking help also. It is difficult for women because the reasons are different. They need to step out of the house. And very often, psychological trauma happens within four walls, as most of you are aware. And women can be victimized by the intimate partner, by a parent, by a sibling, by a well-known person to the family, whereas the male may be traumatized probably at work or in the peer group and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of examples of interpersonal trauma, like I already mentioned, and some of them are very, very severe, life-threatening, such as rape, almost leading to homicide. There is, of course, the concept of gang rape and so on, and trafficking. There are a lot of interpersonal trauma events that can be given as examples, apart from intimate partner violence and so on. Bullying, of course, is something which is ubiquitous. Now, what you have to remember is that when you're dealing with trauma, the ethical issue is to prepare the client for disclosure, not to push too hard, to give them time to make sure that you're following ethical guidelines about how you're going to phrase the questions, what you're going to ask, what is the degree of privacy and confidentiality that you can provide, and what kind of support systems are required in case you find that there is a significant event that has occurred. Now, when it comes to psychological trauma, I would just like to highlight, because I was told that I must talk about psychological trauma and work. So when it comes to work, the first and foremost thing is first responders that Dr. Vidya mentioned. That is the professionals who have to respond to a critical incident. So depending on the incident, it can be the nursing profession, the road traffic police, or it can be the firemen and so on. And then you have also criminal law or acts of parliament, such as protection of women against sexual harassment at the workplace and so on. So there are certain guidelines about reducing psychological trauma at the workplace, but I find that psychologists tend to work in very sanitized ivory tower. So when you say workplace, it's the whole world. It's the whole world that is the workplace, and you need to make sure that you're working ethically and that you're very sensitive to the issue of psychological trauma. Thank you.
Thank you, Suman. So Suman took us out of the clinic and took us into psychological trauma, another area where psychologists can work. She talked about the classification of trauma, the support. I mean, the fact that the same trauma can hit different individuals in different ways. So we need to understand the individual. One-shoe-fits-all approach is not possible. And then what psychologists can do to help alleviate this ethically with confidentiality, etc. After having talked about two areas in mental health, we are now going into